Hawkins lays the groundwork for 3DO. Broderbund goes public. And Sony shows off the PlayStation. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the video game and home computer industries 40, 30, and 20 years ago. On today's show, we're going to be jumping back 30 years to December of 1991. I'm your host, Carl, and back with us is our co-host, Peter. Say hi, Peter.
Hi.
Hi. So, before we turn on the time machine, Banter, how are you?
Well, I told you like 6 hours ago how I am. yes, because
but
boosted up, we are in a good mood to meet each other again in person.
Ooh.
So this was nice.
Yeah. It was. Yeah. We haven't done that in a while. Now, granted, our significant others were also there, so there was no game playing or shop talk.
No,
but
it was pretty.
It was nice.
Sophisticated.
It was nice. Sophisticated, yes. Very, very classy, because we're classy or something. Yeah. Okay, but yes, we are back for those people listening to us in the distant future. We're still in the middle of the pandemic, so yeah, this was a highlight for us. Now,
I haven't seen you in real life in like.
Oh, it's got to be a few months.
No,
it's a few
longer.
I don't know. Yeah, it's been a while. Last time you guys were over was it was summertime. It was summertime. So yeah, almost 6 months.
Half a year. Oh, Lord.
Yeah, Jesus. Yeah. It used to be a time when I got tired of seeing you. So this is new experience. New experience. Oh well.
I mean, you miss me so much right now. You want me to come over right now?
No.
Nah.
No, not that much.
Man, I remember back in the day when we used to hang out like every week.
Oh, geez, man.
I remember this karaoke bar.
Oh, yeah, man. I miss the good times, yeah. Drinking and singing bad covers of Meatloaf songs.
Oh yeah.
The good
or Billy Joel.
Billy Joel, yeah. I can't. I didn't start the fire. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now enough of that. And I know. I'll get ahead of Ethan right now. We didn't start the fire. I'm sorry. Okay. Now,
well,
let's before we get ahead of all that, remember everybody that number one, we use the cover dates of publications for our dating principles here. So we do know that the news happened at some point before that. It's just a convenient structure of the show. Second, we have two segments that we must do before we turn on the time machine. And the first of that is 7 Minutes in Heaven, where the co-host must play one of the games that was reviewed in a publication dated December 1991 that they have never played before. Now, we did have a lot of games at our disposal this time around. Some of the contenders would have been Terminator 2, the arcade game, James Bond 2, RoboCod, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, Wing Commander 2, Leisure Suit Larry 5, Passionate Patty Does a Little Undercover Work, Battle Isle, Road Rash for the Genesis, Populous 2, and the one that probably would have won out was Alien Breed on the Amiga. Unfortunately, though, as we're recording this on the 30th of December 2021, one John Madden, a football legend, passed away just 2 days ago. So it only felt appropriate, and especially since he will pop up in one of our stories later on. Well, we might just deal with it in the 7 Minutes in Heaven segment. But we need to talk today about a game that bore his name, that was reviewed in several December 1991 issues, namely John Madden Football 1992 by Electronic Arts, or as they were calling the label at the time, EASN. So, Peter, as the great connoisseur of American football that you are you ready to dive in to some football?
You mean, am I ready to not do him justice? Yes, totally.
Excellent. Then that's what we're here to do. So, with no further ado, go and play.
Set. Red. 28. Hot. Hot. First down.
Welcome back, Peter, from your 7 Minutes in Heaven. So, if you had to describe John Madden 92 to somebody, what would you say is the game based on your 7 minutes with?
Well, based on my 7 minutes, it's a American football simulator where you have two teams, obviously. You have, I think it's 11 players per team, which you see on the screen at the same time. And you basically play American football. It's a 2D game, top down, so you have a bird's perspective on the playing field, and you control one guy directly, and you can set the tactics for your team, and you play American football.
Okay. Now, you say that as if you actually knew how to play American football before I explained it to you after you played.
I mean, it was pretty obvious. I saw the game, I saw double blitz, and I saw single blitz, and I saw hand and whatnot. And I mean, it is totally obvious. I mean, there's no game easier than American football. And so I made the right decision to end the game right before the other team scored a point, because miraculously the 7 minutes were over by.
Yeah, so you were on your own second yard line. They had just gotten a first down, and
I had no idea what I was doing, man. I had no idea.
Very nice, very nice. So now, graphically, how would you describe the graphics of the game? Now, this is a Sega Genesis game. So.
Yeah, it's a Sega Genesis game, and it's actually pretty colorful. I mean, yeah, of course, you can count pixels, sure. However, I mean, it's from 1991.
Yeah.
And finally, it's called Madden 1992, so foreshadowing. And
it gets reviewed in the December issue, so it's, the game for the next year. It's kind of like car models.
Okay. But it's actually pretty colorful. And, when I compare it to the Super Nintendo graphics, to the graphics of the Super Nintendo I had, where I had a soccer game and you had 5 players at the same time on screen, and here you have 11 players plus 1 or 2 referees, depending on where you are on the field. So this is actually pretty impressive. Yeah.
Not only that, but you also notice that the field had a zooming effect.
Yeah.
And the players got smaller
because I was too busy. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really cool zooming effect, and it also shifts slightly because you don't have the entire width of the field on screen at any given time. So, and that had always been one of the problems with football games, that you either saw them like Tecmo Bowl on the NES, which was a very popular football game, just showed everything from this very broken bird's eye view. And stuff. And here the camera's moving. It's more dynamic. It's zooming in and out. Well, it's not zooming in, but you're basically following the player at the bottom of the screen, and you're actually seeing the people in the distance are a little bit smaller. So it's definitely a league above everything else that had come out at that point.
Oh, and also you had little picture-in-picture effects when it showed you where players that are available for you to pass to are.
Definitely.
Which I didn't figure out during the game, but right when I watched it, it was actually pretty obvious when you're not too distracted by figuring out what the hell is going on.
Well, and this is one of those fun things that, those who are patrons of the show can go to our Patreon page and watch the video version of this where we comment on your, gameplay. I guess we could call it gameplay. It was
gameplay. It was a game. I played it. So this is the definition of gameplay. Was I played by the game? Maybe, but there was a game and something was played or someone.
There you go. I love it. So would you go back to John Madden 92?
Honestly, no. Why wouldn't I do that? Because it's a sports game. And like sports games, not comparable.
Yeah. And we sort of alluded to it a little bit earlier. Obviously, John Madden has passed. Wonderfully colorful character, especially in his commentaries on games. But this game does not have the NFL license yet. So all the team names are missing. The team logos are missing. The players' names are missing. So this is still very bare bones as far as that content is concerned, which, of course, in later versions of the game will get massively expanded.
So creating the game was way cheaper back then.
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, alone the number of people who worked on it. I mean, it starts out with the scroll, and it's not a large group.
I mean, yeah, of course, but I'm referring to the licensing fees.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's nowhere near what EA pays for the exclusive license that they have nowadays. Yeah. And there's going to be other NFL licensees in the meantime. It's going to be a while before it becomes an exclusive license for EA. And also, we have to remember, and we talked about this a little bit in the video version, but this is still EASN, the Electronic Arts Sports Network, and they're basically copying a little bit of what Cinemaware did with their TV sports series and what Scott Orr, the designer of John Madden on console, also had previously done in his game ABC Monday Night Football on the Commodore 64, DOS, and Amiga for Data East. So,
not EA Sports yet.
Not yet. That is yet to come because it's not yet in the game.
Exactly. Your voice is lower.
Yeah. Everything sounds better in my voice. Come on. Okay. So one more stop before we turn on the time machine. And since I already alluded to the Patreon, remember, everybody, you can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram and Patreon. And if you follow us on Patreon, remember that you can also get early access to our interview episodes, and we do have a very special one coming up very soon. We're going to have some luminaries in the video game history scene coming in to do a little retrospective on a book that was turning 20 years old in December, and that book is Stephen Kent's Ultimate History of Video Games. So, look forward to that and all the other fun stuff that we have up there just for our patrons. It's only $1 a month. Come on, what are you waiting for? So, with that being said, let's check in with one of the luminaries that will be on that special, one Mr. Ethan Johnson, for our Department of Correction. Welcome back, Ethan. So, before you can kick me in the proverbial family jewels for my mistakes in our November 1991
this is a
episode.
Soothing place that will invigorate your soul like a sauna.
Oh, okay. I can feel the steam coming up already from all this hot air that you're blowing at me. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, hey. Before you can get into the few minor quibbles of possible
always minor
misinformation I may have delved into in my November 1991 jump, we have
the Mads comment. The Mads comment, if you couldn't tell.
I could tell.
Yes, Carl, but you can speak Ethanese. I'm not sure the rest of your listeners can quite do that. So, you're going through a list of games that were published on the Amiga, and I had to go and correct Mads just to make sure that he knew that he was not safe himself. Just as Peter was corrected last time, Mads, you shall be corrected. Samurai Warrior did not come out for the Amiga.
Yes, and I did I not comment on that at the time?
You were,
I let that go.
You weren't sure, so you were going back and forth.
Yeah, I was pretty certain it wasn't, but I went with the flow at that moment. So yes, unfortunately, the Amiga did not get the joys of the adventures of Usagi Yojimbo.
Indeed. So next up, November 1991. You were talking about the Lynx and how it paled in comparison to the Game Boy library, and you said, it doesn't match up to something like Zelda, but the Link's Awakening was not available for the Game Boy in November 1991.
This is true. It wasn't out yet.
And
yeah.
Oh, sorry,
I'm trying to remember if it had already been announced at that point.
I have no idea. I do not read these month by month. Next up, the Nintendo development with the Minnesota lottery system. I do not believe, again, this is a speculative thing. I'm being speculative in the Department of Corrections, everybody, but I didn't have time to look this up. But I do not believe that Nintendo was actually, internal Nintendo NCL was responsible for developing the software for the Minnesota lottery system. I know that it worked off of systems from Computer or Control General. That was the kind of mainframe of everything. But of course, they would have needed a game front end. And you can, there's some photos up there. You can see the pixel art and whatnot. But I don't think it was NCL. I do not believe they would have helped develop that in a tangible, aside from support.
Yeah, well, I mean, if they didn't, you would still then need to bypass the lockout chip on the cartridge.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that they didn't license it, because it does appear that they were on board with it. But I'm just saying NCL didn't develop the software that was going to go into it.
Yeah, and this was something that I couldn't decipher from the different articles about it either. Nobody seemed to be going into it in any great detail. There were no developers listed, but there was some speculation I found online based off of the way that the interface was set up, that it looked very similar to something else from one of the Famicom modem applications. So that was what brought up the speculation that it was Nintendo themselves who had developed it.
I don't think that they developed that either. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, again, this was all forum-based stuff, so probably I shouldn't have made built a speculation off of that.
Anyways, let's move on to another online thing. You were talking about the Sierra Network, and you were talking about how Bill Gates and somebody else were playing card games on the system. And you named every aspect about him except his name. Of course, that is Mr. Warren Buffett.
Yes. I was kicking myself right after I was done with the episode. We finished recording. I was like, Warren Buffett. Damn. Forgot.
Yeah, I remember reading those stories back in the day. Yes, billionaires and their toys,
Exactly. Well, Ken Williams, when I talked to him, he mentioned it as well. So.
And finally up, another animated thing, because apparently we're talking about animation as much as we're talking about video games now. So the Grinch animated film from the wonderful Chuck Jones was released in 1966, and the Boris Karloff was also the narrator. He does two different voices for the Grinch and the narrator.
Yeah, and I got it confused with the songs were sung by
Thurl Ravencroft.
Ravencroft, thank you. Yes, which I mean really just sounds like the kind of name you'd have for a horror actor, Ravencroft. I mean, how that guy did not become an actor in horror movies, I don't know. But okay.
Yep.
Is that it?
We have finally cleansed you of your ills, and you can feel lifted once again, and leave the Department of Corrections thankful and joyous. You see that, me writing it down on your status report? Thankful and joyous.
I am so happy. I'm cleansed. My sins have been washed away in the fire of your corrections. Oh, thank you. So now
wonderful.
I'm going to go off and turn on the time machine and make a whole bunch of new blunders. Woohoo!
All right, bud.
That's how this works, right? Never-ending cycle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Get out of here.
Can you remember that like 2 minutes earlier you said that everything sounds better with your voice?
Yes, I do remember that.
You mean the sound of defeat, man.
Nah, come on. There wasn't that much there. There wasn't that much there. It was all good. Made it through pretty unscathed. I am very, very happy. Hell, Mads took the worst of it this time, so it's all good. Yeah. So there you go. Woohoo! Ball's in your court, Peter. Now you've got to come up with something terrible that gets corrected.
Dude, I'm doing the 7 minutes. Isn't that sufficient?
Yeah, no, it's not. Okay, good. So, with that being said, let's turn on the time machine and head back to December of 1991.
Now there's a new game in the video arcade.
1991. Virtual reality is the best way than play.
The market's very fickle.
Welcome to December of 1991. Peter, what is our first story?
Microprose joins forces with Jaleco in the arcade.
Computer gaming veterans Microprose have joined forces with Jaleco or God only knows how it's supposed to be pronounced, USA, to release their second arcade game, Bots. A second joint venture title is in the works, and they promise to show it off at the Acme 92 show in San Antonio.
So what is Bots all about?
Bots was a 3D vector-based giant robot combat sim. So think Mech Warrior, but without a license.
Okay.
And
so you're shooting at lines.
Yeah. Well, if you remember, we talked about this a while ago. Microprose had launched an arcade version of their hit computer game, F-15 Strike Eagle. And it was a bit of a flop. Had some popularity due to Operation Desert Storm, the first Gulf War. But beyond that, it was just set up way too complicatedly for the arcades. It wasn't easy enough to jump into. The vector graphics, while good for their time, just made the world very sparse. And it just wasn't going to go anywhere. This is, of course, a little bit more arcadey. You're piloting a giant mech, blowing up other people. You don't have to worry about flight heights and stuff because you're always on the same ground. Bots is also not going to fare well. Longtime listeners who listened to my interview with Wild Bill Staley know that Microprose's venture into the arcades was in utter disaster. And even though Bots is a better fit for the arcade, it's still too much. And it's not going to have that effect of, toss in a quick quarter, figure out what's going on, and then toss in more quarters to see what happens next.
Yeah, no one does this.
Yeah, and I don't know if they actually did show another game at Acme 92. We'll see when we get there in a few months. But these are the only two games that are released with the Microprose logo, so to speak. So Jaleco is taking over the project probably for a song and dance just to get it off their hands. And this is pretty much the end of Microprose's venture into the arcades. But their financial problems will be short-lived because of another story that's coming a little bit later this episode.
Oh, yeah. Where being a complicated game really pays out.
Yeah, but not in the arcades.
Not in the arcade, though.
Speaking of complications in the arcades.
Speaking of those, Philip Morris wants game makers not to use their logos.
Tobacco giant Philip Morris has taken out a one-page ad in this month's Playmeter magazine, and they are warning game makers not to use their trademarks in games as smoking is a, quote, adult choice, end quote, and they don't want children to smoke.
Can you do this? Can you just, like that, use a logo in your game?
No, you can't. And we talked about this a while back, that Sega had actually used Philip Morris logos, that red and white 2 triangle thing, in their game Super Monaco GP. That had shown up, at least in the Japanese version of the game. And probably also the European version. I'd have to check again. And it became a bit of a controversy, and they had to change out the ROMs. But especially in things like racing games and other places where Philip Morris has ads, the authenticity question of, can we replicate to make it look authentic, replicate the ads that are also showing up in these events? And that's really where this is coming in. And because games are still seen as a children's activity, the cigarette companies don't want to get pulled into any, corrupting the youth stuff that may come from games.
Yeah. This is actually rather responsible. I mean, it's free advertisement for them.
And it's free advertisement for them, but it's also the kind of publicity they don't want. And if a game maker does go ahead and use their logo, at least they can say that they asked them not to. And in addition to that, remember, this is also a time period when the NES is in full swing still. The Super NES has just launched in North America. And the idea of kids playing too much Nintendo has been the subject of countless newspaper articles. Countless, parent groups are upset by it. And so this idea of video game backlash, which was already seen at one point in the late 70s, you saw a version of it in the early 80s. The last thing Philip Morris wants to do is get caught, in the middle of this, especially because the anti-smoking movement is really gaining speed in the United States around this time. More and more places aren't allowing smoking. They just don't need this kind of bad press.
Exactly. And advertisement amongst kids, this is what bubblegum cigarettes are for. Stick to that.
And, of course, Joe Camel and all that other stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, they've got enough. The industry has enough problems. They don't need this problem.
Okay, got it. So, let's leave the industry and let's move on.
At least leave the arcade. We're staying in the industry. Well, video game industry.
Well, yeah, I was in the arcade industry. So, yeah. Whatever. Let's go over to the blue section. Software Publishers Association.
He's referring to the color coding of my notes. So now we're leaving the arcade section and going to the blue section because, yes, this has been a topic now with all the co-hosts, apparently. Okay.
Really?
Yeah. It was Mads commented on it as well. He was like, Carl changed the colors here. I don't know why. He didn't explain it to me, but there was a different color. So you don't listen to any other episodes. You don't even listen to
I didn't work out for quite a while in the gym, Our podcast, for some reason, is my go-to podcast when I'm in the gym.
That makes sense. That's what gym or shopping. Those are the two events when I listen to podcasts. So these days.
Yeah, shopping is can't do.
Well, I usually do it by myself because the wife is at home with the kids. So this is why pop in the headphones and I got an hour to myself. It's kind of nice.
Yeah. Okay. I get that.
Yeah.
No, this is what gym was for me, but no, during the COVID and right before Christmas, I really didn't want to go into the gym. When you see your family, your parents, your grandparents.
Of course.
You don't want to do that. So
I hear you.
No podcast for me. Anyway, moving on to the blue section. Software Publishers Association Conference.
Try that one again from the top.
How to break a German. Software Publishers Association Conference. Sees choppy waters on horizon.
The SPA, I know. The SPA held their 7th annual conference in September to discuss the present and future of the computer software industry. While many views were expressed, the general theme could not be misunderstood. 16-bit consoles were coming to eat everyone's lunch. Trip Hawkins declared that the consoles offered the best bang for the consumer's buck, and despite the preconceived notions of some that they are merely for kids, EA has successfully reached the 20-year-old Genesis customer, as well as kids flocking to the system. Friend of the show Joe Morici also predicted that the 16-bit consoles would drive the console software share of the overall software market ever higher.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and we should understand here, the Software Publishers Association is a primarily computer software publishers association. And the organization itself is over time going to evolve away from gaming into professional stuff and merge with some other organizations. But at this point, there is still a very significant representation by the gaming side of things. And the fact that console gaming is back, console gaming is huge, and console gaming is eating up the market share or splitting the market is really a big issue. And yeah.
I mean, you need a game changer for the computer game market, games that primarily run well on a computer, real-time strategies.
Well, yes and no. As we'll see, I mean, Doom and Wolfenstein are straight-up action games. You don't need, it's not a thinking man's game in that sense, but... The real problem with the PC at this point, and by PC we are talking about the DOS PCs, is because it's North America. All the other machines don't really play a role anymore by 92. The Amiga is all but dead. The Atari ST is definitely dead. Commodore 64 is on its very, very last legs. Yeah. And everything else has died or gone by the wayside. Now, the one big worry that the SPA has, especially the computer people have, is that there's still no standardization in the PC hardware. And
true that.
It's so complicated to make games for the system. Because, you still have people running CGA. You've got people running EGA. You've got people running VGA. You've got SVGA on the horizon. You've got Hercules graphics still need to be supported by a lot of publishers.
Yeah.
And then the sound cards. There's AdLib and Sound Blaster and Disney Sound Source and all these other different standards that are not compatible with one another. Then you still have the clone CPUs, so that you've got your straight up Intel chips, but then you also have clone chips that may or may not work with everything, so you can't really program an assembler and be 100% certain it's going to run on all the systems. You've got different memory configurations. You've got multiple different versions of DOS. So do you make it run on DOS 5.0? Is it going to run on, or at this point it's not 5.0 yet. It's probably still DOS 3 or 4. And then you also have Windows now on the horizon, Windows 3. What are you going to do with that? It's an absolute cluster to make sure your program's going to run on a decent percentage of the machines. And this is one of the big things that is really preventing the broadening of the user base, because you cannot simply plug it in and run it.
Exactly. It's almost like with electric cars.
Yes, very much. Very much like the electric cars situation, although that standardization is getting better.
Yeah.
But at this point in time, if you want to be a PC gamer, you have to really understand the basics of the hardware. You need to be able to write your own batch files. and so forth. And you're not going to be reaching the casual gamer just wants to turn it on and run a game. And that is really a niche that's being filled by EA games like Madden. I mean, it's designed by Scott Orr, a guy who started off in computers, who poo-pooed the simpler games on consoles for years, and now he's basically making one of the biggest console gaming franchises that will ever be. So,
well, might as well do it myself.
Exactly. And the complexity of the consoles is growing. The fact that the Super Nintendo controller has 6 fire buttons plus the start and select button is already pushing into the territory of, we could do a more complicated simulator on this pad. Mode 7 adds to it as well, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, the PC master race is feeling the burn, and they're going to have to do something that the consoles can't do, or at least give people such a big, spectacular experience that they'll be willing to put up with all the other crap that comes with trying to game on a PC.
Yeah, but due to the lack of standardization, this just doesn't work.
Not yet.
You have to find the lowest common denominator, and this really makes it hard.
And Radio Shack is the closest thing to the solution with their Tandy 1000 line of computers right at this point. I mean, they are selling, this ready-in-a-box machine that is selling in so many millions of units that, you can write on your game that it runs on the Tandy 1000 SX. Boom. No questions asked. If you have a Tandy 1000 SX, it'll run there.
Yeah.
And it's everybody who's building a PC on their own where you have no idea if it's going to work or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh well. Well, moving on. Tokyo's International Electronics Show awash with CD-ROMs.
While Philips, Sanyo, Panasonic, and NEC showed off CDI-compatible devices at the show, NEC was also showing off their own proprietary system, the Multimedia Player, or MMP1, which would work with their new interactive display technology. As far as I can tell, this demo unit is what would eventually evolve into the failed PC-FX console in 1994.
It's always so funny that at the beginning of standardization, there are always, something that in retrospective turns out to be clear losers from the get-go, but back in the time, you surely cannot see this. Microsoft Zune, another story like that.
Well, it's the CDI standard. This interactive CD format as not something that you're going to be, using only on your computer as an add-on drive, but as something that you're going to be plugging into your TV as a form of entertainment. Well, that's the thing that makes no sense. It's the thing that is it's a technology that is not mature enough to add extra value to the entertainment people already have. And everybody is jumping on CDI thinking, well, Philips got it right the first time with CD. They're going to get it right again with CDI. And unfortunately, even Philips doesn't see that this thing isn't going to do much.
Yeah.
And the multimedia player from NEC, like I said, I don't know it for certain, but from the information I was able to gather, I'm guessing that this is going to get delayed for 2 years, but it's ultimately going to be the PCFX, which was their last attempt at a console. We've talked about the PC Engine, which was the TurboGrafx 16 in North America. Then we also talked about their follow-up to that, I believe the PC PC Engine Core, or whatever it's called, which only got like 8 games, which is also basically a failure. And this CD-based console, which is going to be used almost exclusively for FMV games and some dating simulators. It's, a Japan exclusive, and it doesn't go anywhere because the technology is too limited at that point, and when it does come out in 1994, it's going up against the PlayStation, where 3D graphics become the king, and the FMV is no longer seen as adding value to games. It's more of a hindrance to gameplay. So, yeah, this whole idea right here with the CDI and just, streaming media and jumping from one location on the disk to the next for different pieces of media is too limited of a interactivity to really have value. But you can see from the number of companies jumping on it, everybody, thought, hey, if this does catch on, we don't want to miss the bandwagon.
Yeah. I mean, you want to be in from the get-go. If it catches on, then this is when you make money.
Well, and that's the thing. Nobody wanted to be caught outside, but at the same time, nobody was willing to say that the emperor had no clothes.
Yeah.
So it's weird. But there was somebody at the show who was thinking bigger.
Yeah. Sony shows off PlayStation at Tokyo Electronics Show.
The Consumer Electronics Show in Tokyo was held in October, and Sony showed off the PlayStation, a multimedia-capable CD-ROM drive for use with the Super NES. While Nintendo has ditched them in favor of their rival Philips, Sony as unperturbed as always when showing off their flashy new drive. No game software was announced, but versions of various CD-based atlases and encyclopedias were planned for the launch, which will be 6 to 12 months before Nintendo's own CD add-on.
I just like the fact that they're putting atlases and encyclopedias on CDs to watch. In times of the internet, this is just so. I mean, yes, I know it makes sense, but in times of the internet, it's just so ridiculous to think of that.
Yeah. I mean, again, at the time, it was so mesmerizing. Oh, yeah. I remember the first time I got to use a CD-ROM encyclopedia was in high school. This would have been in 94. We had a machine set up in the library just for the purpose of running this encyclopedia. And I probably watched this super grainy, terrible clip of the Hindenburg Disaster 100 times because it was just fascinating that I could now access this whenever I felt like it.
And you say I'm sadistic for liking our podcast to end with companies dying?
Well, I mean, it was, okay, the Hindenburg Disaster. I knew it as, this clip I had seen maybe once or twice on TV. I knew it, the speaker speaking was the inspiration for the radio drama of War of the Worlds by Orson Welles. I had never actually heard the guy speaking.
Oh.
Well, think about it. You couldn't go to the video store and rent that out. It's like a 20-second clip at best.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, now you just YouTube
it's sitting
it
there.
And you're good.
Exactly. But and when they showed it on TV, it was always, in a historical context where you got maybe 2 or 3 words out of it, and then the speaker would start speaking, or there was part of some show. So I had heard about this legendary piece of footage. There was no way to access it, and suddenly it's right there, and I can watch it as many times as I want. This was revolutionary, having the mass amount of data at your fingertips. Obviously, today we have exponentially larger sums of data at our fingertips through the internet, but we're coming from a world where a floppy disk on my Amiga was only held 800K to suddenly having 600 megs on one disk. Magic. It was more than magic, dude. This was just fascinating. We had another computer on the other side of this column in the library that had a searchable database of the Seattle Times newspaper. And I remember going back and reading all these news articles about Commodore business machines, the company. And that's how I learned about this guy called Jack Tramiel for the first time. I never heard that this guy existed. I didn't know that there was a guy who founded Commodore, and he had this background story and everything. And I'm finding it in this searchable database and going through 10 and 12-year-old newspaper articles. This was a revelation. And So the fascination with this kind of media makes perfect sense at the time.
Yeah, of course it makes sense.
But
although I have to say, I remember that I was gifted a Bertelsmann encyclopedia, and being what was I, 5, 6 year old? No, 7, 8, something like a year old kid. I didn't know what to do with that.
Like I said, I was a senior in high school, and my curiosity about the history of many things and how media came about and stuff was really, really in high gear already at that point.
Yeah.
And this was like manna from heaven. It was just, handed to you. Now, yeah.
It was when everyone else was in the back of the schoolyard kissing and trying their first cigarettes, you were watching the Hindenburg Disaster over and over again.
That, and I was also fascinated by the fact that the library also had a subscription to The Economist, so I spent almost every single one of my breaks reading magazines in there until, of course, at the same time the O.J. Simpson trial started, and then I would spend my lunch breaks watching the live footage in my American history teacher's classroom. He'd let me watch it on this big old projector TV that he had.
You're such a people person.
Yeah. What can I say? I already knew I wanted to be a lawyer at that point, and this was fascinating to be able to watch a trial on television live.
Yeah.
Again, we lived in a very different media landscape back then. So, okay. Now, a quick note about the PlayStation as shown there, and this showed up in the article about it in Electronic Gaming Monthly. They mentioned that the PlayStation CD-ROM drive that they were showing seemed a little underpowered, and that is in comparison with the Mega CD, which it's not out in the States yet, but the demos are out, and it has all the additional rotation features and stuff. It's like Mode 7, but with some extra bells and whistles.
Okay.
And there are comments about how it is lacking that extra power that the Mega CD was bringing to it. It just seems to be a drive, and it's just using the Super NES's hardware for everything else. And it only has a measly 64 kilobits of memory buffer, which is going to absolutely destroy any possibility for lots of streaming video from the CD, because you need more than 64 kilobits. Yeah. So, yeah. It doesn't look like a promising product, which is probably also why it never made it into production to begin.
And the success story of the joint venture of Sony and Nintendo is well known.
Well, and we've already covered that in the show about how they ditched them, went over to Philips and so forth. But what Sony is showing here is not something that's really going to excite anybody. I don't think, and it's kind of cool that they kept the name basic. I still think they just kept the name, in this pure speculation, but I think they kept the name just to piss Nintendo off.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, oh well.
Oh, Lord. Actually fun to imagine a world where this joint venture really worked,
It would have been fascinating to see those two companies team up.
Yeah.
But ultimately, Sony is so much bigger as a company than Nintendo at this point that it wouldn't have been a partnership of equals. And so I think that's probably one of the reasons why Nintendo got cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. But speaking of their new partners.
Yes, Philips launches line of CD PCs.
Philips showed off a new line of PCs sporting CD-ROM drives at Comdex. The machines labeled PCD215 and PCD315 come bundled with 5 CDs containing games such as Wing Commander, Ultima, and Manhole. The high-end 20 MHz 386 variant is going for $2,499. Philips sees the future of computing in what they are calling the Multimedia PC, or MPC for short. The level 1 MPC will be able to handle animation, music, sound, effects, and speech, and run Windows 3.0, DOS 5.0, and sport a hard drive.
And the level 2 MPC was also able to do your dishes, or what?
I don't know what they were counting as a level 2 MPC, but I'm guessing it probably also had a lot more to do with, real-time, three-dimensional graphics and stuff. But I don't think they really thought that far through. It was just a marketing gimmick to say, if your computer can't do X, Y, and Z, then it's not an MPC. It's trying to jump on this multimedia catchphrase.
And I mean, $2,500. Oh, Lord. That's a pretty hefty sum.
That's a pretty hefty sum, but I mean, for a high-end PC, remember that's probably also including the monitor at this point. But a 20 megahertz 386 with a VGA card and that CD drive, this is super, super high-end tech. I mean, for the time. And, granted, adjusted for inflation, you got to probably double that. But it is, that's just, you want the latest of the latest of the latest. That's what you had to pay for a PC back then. Yeah, I mean, $1,500 to $2,000 is not uncommon for a full PC package at this time.
Yeah. Sorry,
you're hard pressed to justify the cost.
Yeah.
Especially when a Genesis is going for $99.
Exactly.
Or $199. No, Genesis is $150. I can't remember. We talked about a few months ago that they dropped the price right before Christmas, but
yeah. But this really shows that the concerns of the SPRA are well founded. When computers go for so much money over the table and you get your consoles for way less and you can play games way more easily by just plug and play.
Yeah. And also remember that the consoles have already had CD add-on drives for a while. I mean, the TurboGrafx 16 CD add-on had been out for quite a while at this point.
I mean, you didn't have to pay attention to anything. I remember back, even in 95, 96, you'd have the system requirements always also required a 4 times, 5 times, whatever CD drive. You also had to pay attention to that next to the processor, the graphic cards, Voodoo or comparable.
And a couple months ago, we talked about how Sierra abandoned their plans to release a CD-ROM drive through their mail order system because they couldn't figure out what was going to be the predominant standard. You can buy a ROM drive for your computer at this point. There's no guarantee it's going to be compatible with the discs that you can buy in the stores.
Exactly.
So everything is in flux at this point. Nothing really makes a lot of sense. And it's going to be a little while yet before all those bits and pieces come together to become a whole. And there are people, though, who are thinking about how to bring things together and standardize stuff.
Yeah, of course. You need that.
Oh, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, next story. That was the transition.
Yeah, you need that. You need that the San Mateo software group is.
Not a good save. No, you did not save that one nicely.
I'm smiling nonetheless.
Okay, good. 3 major players in the entertainment and software industries, Electronic Arts, Time Warner, and venture capital firm Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield & Byers, have joined together to form SMSG. The exact purpose of the company isn't known yet, but based on comments made by Trip Hawkins at the SPA conference, the future of multimedia will involve leveraging cable television's upgrade into fiber optics. Warner is a major cable operator in the USA in addition to a content creator for film and television as well as software. Tripp will become the head of the new company as expected to split his time between EA and SMSG.
So, what did they do?
Well, they would ultimately become the 3DO company, and a few other partner companies would join in, including Matsushita and Panasonic later on, and launch a little console called the 3DO.
Huh.
And, well, when we get to it, you've probably never used a 3DO, right?
No.
Okay. 3DO wasn't a console, it was a console standard. So the idea is that each console manufacturer would be able to make their own console, but they would all be compatible with one another.
Yeah.
And so what Trip was trying to do was solve that standardization problem by creating a multimedia platform that would be strong enough to go into the future, but also have some basic standards that would allow for everybody to make their own devices, and you'd have multiple manufacturers being able to create products at different price points, and through that basically get rid of this whole, Sega or Nintendo and so on and so forth, and just have everybody create compatible devices. Where it's going to fail massively is the fact that they're not going to finance it through licensing fees on the software. Anybody's basically going to be able to make software for this thing, and the manufacturers were going to have to produce this at a price point that is going to turn a profit for them. That's different from the model where, you sell the machine at cost or lower than cost, and you make your money back on licensing fees for the software. Yeah. So you're going to end up with a console that's a little bit expensive. And by a little bit expensive, I'm talking $800 to $900.
I mean, comparing it to the PCs, it's still pretty good. Comparing it to the Genesis, you lose.
Yeah. And the problem is that you can't run Excel on it. So it's not going to be compared to the PCs. It's a console. And it's not going to be it's going to have success to a certain extent, and we'll talk more about it in the next couple of years as it launches, but it's going to become a problem.
I'm wondering why they did it for the console market. Since, why would you need a tier? Wouldn't the PC market be a way better place for this initiative to take?
No, because Trip is like we said with his comments at the SPA. He sees the future he sees the fiber optics. He sees the data transfer from a central server as key. But the connection through the cable lines is in the living room, not in the office.
Yeah.
So you're not going to be putting the PC under the television. Unless, of course, you're Microsoft launching the original Xbox, but that's 10 years down the line. And what he's really seeing here is if we're going to do this, it's going to be the entertainment device. It doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles of a computer. It doesn't have to do your bookkeeping. It doesn't have to write your letters and all that stuff. And if we do have to include all those things, like the keyboard, for example, which is a cost factor that we in manufacturing that we can't ignore, it's not going to work. So we need to pare it down to the bare minimum and make it work that way. So that's why it's I shouldn't say this. I shouldn't limit it, but. And again, we're jumping ahead a lot here, but 3DO, they will release an add-on board so you can run 3DO software on your PC. So it's basically an entire 3DO console as an add-on card that you plug onto your motherboard. It's going to be relatively expensive, and not a lot of them are going to be sold, but still, it is going to be an option. And one interesting thing, side note here, is that Computer Gaming World magazine posits that Sony, which has already been garnering attention as a potential behemoth, with the PlayStation and so forth, should it enter the multimedia space, may find that it isn't the only big fish able to leverage its experience in multiple areas. Now, remember, Sony owns a movie studio at this point. Sony owns music publishing. Sony has a lot of experience with home electronics. So in theory, if Sony comes in, they're going to have leverage over all the current players because Nintendo doesn't have all that.
Yeah.
Sega doesn't have all that. And the San Mateo Software Group could theoretically be that counterbalance, especially with this combination of partners. And so, in a way, you could say this would be a fight then between 3DO and Sony, which it kind of becomes in 94, 95. But foreshadowing. But the big difference is 3DO is not really designed for 3D graphics in the same way that the PlayStation was. And when we talk about the PlayStation launch, there's certain design decisions with the hardware of the PlayStation, certain sacrifices that were made that made it the better system for that next generation of software. And 3DO is still had 1 foot in the past, 1 foot with 2D graphics, and just never is able to make that next leap. And a lot of that, I think, and again, I'm leaning out and speculating here, but I think a lot of it has to do with the people who designed the 3DO. There's a lot of the old Amiga designers on board, and they're still thinking in terms of 2D planes and having multiple layers of stuff being able to be processed on the screen as opposed to just how do we push polygon. And that break with the past is one of the advantages the PlayStation brings to the table, and why the Sega Saturn doesn't stand a chance against it. And it's only the N64 that can really compete with the PlayStation, but that gets, hamstrung due to the fact that it's using cartridges and not CDs. Yeah. And an additional note here, while the SPA was founded in 1984, and I talked about this earlier with the SPA, they were mainly small software companies. A lot of game companies were in there, but in 84, we still had a lot of those small game companies also trying to do productivity software and other things. And by this point, those guys are slowly starting to get pushed out, and there's even a lot of bitching and moaning that the SPA doesn't really represent the game makers anymore because they launched an anti-piracy campaign that did not include games at all. They just concentrated on things like operating systems and productivity software. So
the important stuff.
Yeah, and the big ticket items. So yeah, the SPA is becoming less and less important for the game makers. Within the next couple of years, they're going to be completely out of it, and we're going to see new organizations popping up that represent game makers. Okay, so yes.
So this was a rather large block. So let's do some. Let's pick up some speed.
Yeah.
Commodore updates the Amiga.
Yeah, speaking of the Amiga, shops are beginning to carry the brand new Amiga 500 Plus. While externally almost identical to the existing A500, the new machine has some added keys, 1 meg of memory, and an updated Agnes chip, the 8375HR. Sadly, this has led to many games not working, including such classics as Bubble Bobble, Lotus, Midwinter, and Swiv. Yeah,
The Walking Dead.
Well, and this is this plays in a lot with the compatibility issues and that we were talking about earlier. The Amiga hardware is in many ways the third generation of that started with the Atari 2600. It's, same original designer for the video chips in the Atari 2600, the Atari 8-bit computers, and the Amiga, J. Miner. And it's very much about figuring out, okay, how do I layer stuff on top of each other? How do I do a lot of timing issues between scan lines on an RGB monitor or television set? So while the ray beam is drawing the line on the screen, can I, pop a couple more commands in between and so forth? And this is why the Amiga had so many different screen modes. A lot of people bitch and moan on the Amiga, well, why is this giant black bar at the bottom of my screen and stuff? Well, it's because every programmer could decide basically what resolution to use at any given time. And if you had a bunch of extra black bars at the bottom, you just hope that the user would adjust the horizontal hold on the screen to, or the horizontal size of the screen to get rid of the black bar. But that black bar was processing time when you could do tricks and stuff.
Yeah.
And the problem is by redesigning the Agnes chip, they were adding new screen modes, because Commodore sees the writing on the wall. They know they need to do something new. They were adding new screen modes that were actually going to be more powerful, but this hardware was so perfectly timed for these little things, and so many programmers had figured out tricks to maximize every little millisecond of the processor time to make the games play better and better and better. And that the moment you made any change to the hardware, they didn't work anymore, because you'd be off by just a millisecond, and suddenly the game couldn't display what it was supposed to do. And so this is what's happening with games like Lotus and Swift. And it's really, really kind of crappy. I mean, the programmers are going to learn how to do it, but now they're ending up with the same problems that the PC guys had.
Exactly.
Now, if you're going to release a game, you got to make sure it works on all the different versions of the Agnes chip. You got to make sure it works with all the different versions of the operating system, because they're also updating that. You got to make sure. Now suddenly you have so much old systems that the simplicity of the Amiga, just popping a disc on the side and it would automatically boot and there's your game, is becoming less and less true, and it's going to get much, much worse within the next 12 months when the new machines start popping up. So, okay. I thought it was a nice, extra bit to add in here with all this discussion of standards and standardization and the complexity that comes with a system that has been going on for a little bit longer than originally anticipated.
And this is the last sentence was great for my introduction of this topic, which was, let's pick up some speed. Awesome. Moving on, trying once more. RoboCop 3 to support special hardware protection.
Ocean Software believes they have found the perfect way to combat software piracy. A special chip with over 50 separate levels of protection will prevent software pirates from spreading their new killer 3D game RoboCop 3 for the Amiga.
And the military is jealous.
Not really, because this little chip that you added on to a port in the back of the machine, no, it was, I believe, the second joystick. It was hacked before the game even hit shelves. So there were pirated copies of this game already circulating all over the place on BBS before the game officially hit the shelf. So awesome. The only people who were hurt by this were people who bought the game.
Which is the case with most copy protection.
Yeah, basically. It was a huge, huge flop. They were talking about using this on all their future products, blah, blah, blah. They ended up using it on RoboCop 3, and that was the only. Yeah.
I can't remember how often copy protection just killed some of my PCs. You use some special drivers and whatnot, and the antivirus program and the driver, they weren't really compatible, so the entire system just crashed. Hard crash. Awesome.
Yeah.
Anywho, moving on. Civilization gets revealed in computer gaming world.
Not revealed, reviewed.
I misread. Reviewed.
Yes, one of the greatest games of all time getting reviewed is worthy of note, even if we don't usually talk about game reviews here. But this particular review is especially noteworthy for its computer gaming world's typical dickishness. A subsection titled, quote, political correctness, end quote, chastises the game for trying to be, quote, hip by treating the, quote, unproven theory of global warming as a tremendous threat, letting women's suffrage have a major impact on gameplay and pushing players to avoid pollution.
Seriously.
And the guy who reviewed this went on to make, believe it was not Pirates of Orion, but Masters of Orion 3. And the whole thing just reads basically like Tea Party or neocon nonsense. He still says it's a great game and it's awesome and blah blah blah, but it's like, wow, what a douchebag. And very, very typical of Computer Gaming World magazine at this point in time. I mean, it's hard to go back and read. It was hard to read them back then. I always thought the magazine was dickish, But this was a whole new layer of dick. And
some icing on the cake.
Oh, dude, it was bad. And remember, everybody, links to everything we're talking about are in the show notes. So if you guys want to go read it yourselves, it's up on archive.org, and the link to the exact page that the article starts on is there too. Okay. Well, we've already talked about John Madden going yearly, so we're going to jump over that. And now let's get into the business news.
Let's get into the business news. Broderbund goes public.
Broderbund Software is going to be following Microprose's lead and selling shares on the stock market. This was their second attempt at an IPO after a failed launch in 1987 and the failed merger with Sierra earlier in the year.
Okay.
Well, and I talked about this with Gary Carlson, the co-founder of the company. So, yeah, they failed launch in 87, came after a stock market crash right beforehand, and the talks to merge the company with Sierra, because those two had always had very deep connections. Well, that was also just the company cultures and the types of software they were producing, it didn't make any sense to merge the companies at that point.
Yeah.
And so they finally made their IPO. It was very successful. The stock would continue to rise through 1995, after which it would decline pretty quickly. It's important to understand that at this point, unlike a company like Sierra that is producing a massive variety of products, 33% of their revenue is just coming from print shop, and another 22% of their revenue is coming from the Carmen Sandiego series.
Oh Lord! So 50% of revenue just hanging on two franchises, two
product lines,
products, lines,
and that is one of those things where, I mean, print shop is not something that you can't reproduce. I mean, there's going to be a lot of competitors. The main one is going to become Print Master. And Carmen Sandiego, that is a huge one because it's going to get installed in schools, and it's like the edutainment property. We talked previously about how they licensed it out for a television show that's going to be massively popular and run for many years. There's going to be cartoons. I mean, it's just got revived again on Netflix, so it's still a property that's going strong. But they're very, very niche at this point. They have a limited number of product categories and IP. They're still releasing a ton of other games, but it's not quite where it needs to be.
Speaking about things being not quite where they need to be, Mediagenic files for bankruptcy.
The original first-party publisher has filed for Chapter 11 protection on October 7th. While the existing stockholders will see their stake in the company reduced to just 4.5%, and bondholders getting the majority of the shares, operations will continue with Leather Goddesses of Phobos 2 and Lost Treasures of Infocom still scheduled for pre-Christmas release. Now, Mediagenic is the company known as Activision today.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So,
sorry,
Chapter 11 protection worked? No, it's fine.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, they came out of it. They're still here today, and otherwise they wouldn't be in the hot mess they are in for their other indiscretions. But, yeah. Well, we talked about this earlier in the year that Bobby Kotick came in with investors and was trying to turn the company around after several years of less than stellar performance. And now they're going into Chapter 11 protection, which means that the debts are going to be wiped out. The original shareholders lost almost all value in their shares. And new shares were issued to the old creditors. So the people who had lent the company money, the bondholders, got their bonds traded in for shares. And But what it allows them to do is continue their operations. At this point, the transition from company that supported a lot of different platforms, Commodore 64 and so forth, to an almost exclusively PC DOS-based company is going forward. It's going to be a while before they get back into the console game full-blown. But they will come back. They will regroup. It'll take a few years, but they will become, of course, the behemoth that we know today as Activision.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no company dying today. It's just a company entering into bankruptcy.
It's like Phoenix out of the ashes.
Something
nice.
like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I know the word for today's episode.
Yes. What is it?
A phoenix.
Phoenix.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, also it's December 23rd right now, so old year.
Oh yeah, we just hit. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. So yes, we are now on New Year's Eve. So yeah, it's getting close. I wonder if I can get this edited and uploaded before New Year's Eve. Probably not. Nobody's going to download it anyway. Come on. So okay, that finishes up for today. Remember, everybody, links are in the show notes below. You can find us on all the regular outlets. And until next time, and Happy New Year, or you probably had a Happy New Year by the time you're listening. And yeah, I guess we're done. Peace.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have fun.